Alrighty. Well, it's time for a guest, Ariella. I'm very, very excited to have Matt Karp on with us. Matt is a associate professor of history at Princeton University. He's the author of This Vast Southern Empire, Slaveholders at the Helm of American Foreign Policy. I actually read that book. It's fascinating. I had no idea. I'd never even thought about a slaveholder doing foreign policy. And he's also the author of a gargantuan new piece in Jacobin magazine looking at Bernie Sanders' 5-year war against the Democratic Party, which I have sent to every single one of my friends. Matt, how are you?
I'm happy to be here. I like how in the most of the social media clips for that article, they don't even have an image. I mean that on the website there's the image of Bernie, but in all the other like preview images, it's literally just like pages of text. It's like
Yeah.
this is an article that you will have to read that has lots of text in it because it's like, well, that's the main thing you need to know about this article. It has like 9,000 words in it, so that's totally normal for just like a web article about a politician, like a hot take about Bernie Sanders. Totally normal and totally necessary.
Well, it came out. It came out months after. Like there was like a wave of postmortems that came out just immediately after. You took your time. You did your homework. You read through the data. You waited for all the exit poll stuff to come out, and you combed through it. So the main thrust of a lot of those postmortems was like, was Bernie too radical, or was he not radical enough? And there was like a big debate over that, like should he have worn an American flag pin or something on his suit lapel? But what is your kind of take in the wake of the defeat?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. The problem is I had a hard time consolidating myself to one take. I had like at least like five big takes, meta takes. But I would say the thing, talking to a Jacobin audience, the thing that is most important for us to reckon with is that Bernie had more success and I think his achievement in national politics in showing that there is a mass base for basic democratic socialist ideas like healthcare for all, funded by redistributive taxation, offered as a right by the state to everyone. That this had a mass base of millions, not thousands. But this is the most significant like left wing achievement in national politics, in half a century. At the same time, we're a long way. We've become relevant again, basically, but it's a long way from relevance to power. And in the first like half of the article is about coming to terms with his achievement, and trying to explain, the ongoing resistance within the party to him, which is palpable and obvious, and I barely need to tell you guys about that. But the second half, really the second 2/3, is about reckoning with the limits and that gap between relevance and power, and the hard fact that Bernie, showed, I think, in a lot of ways that these politics, while they appeal to millions, merely enunciating them at this moment is not enough to win a majority in a Democratic primary. I think after these two races, we can see that, and the two races had different characters. They had different contexts, and it's interesting to compare and contrast. And we can go into some of the demographics, which the article does at length. But we need to reckon with the fact that right now we don't have a social democratic, even or let alone a democratic socialist majority within the party. To me, that not having a majority is not an excuse for not trying to build one. We're closer than we've ever been in at least 50 years. It's not a go home, game's over, you lost, back to the doghouse. But it is a question of thinking concretely and unromantically in some ways about not, frankly, and I do this too. All right, fuck it. Never mind. If Bernie comes back in 2024, I'll be romantic. But in the absence of that, we need to think, I think we need medium-term and long-term plans and to think about how to burrow our way into a Democratic majority. That doesn't mean, that's not purely about institutional work within the party. That's not actually the strategy that I prefer. But we need to think about how to make to get this message from 35, 40% to 60% within a party, because I think, to me, that's the only way for these really important ideas to actually be achieved that would, make the lives of millions of people so much better, and set the stage for even more important transformations. So I think we continue in Bernie's path, but we just recognize that there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, I liked that your article took a really sober assessment of things. It was like looking at a balance sheet of his campaign. And I wanted to ask you about a specific area. You were talking about how it digs into demographics. So you explained kind of the struggle for him to win Black voters. And, that was kind of his Achilles heel. His policies were popular with them. He failed to mobilize them and he failed to kind of gain general support there. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, in some ways, that's the element of the entire, Sanders experience that stings the most. I mean, it's not the opposition from, the Nancy Pelosi's of the world or the institutional Democrats. It's not the suburban surge, which really was decisive, I think, this time around, and we can talk about. None of those things were all kind of, banked in when you had a socialist populist candidate. The hard part is that is the Sanders, despite his enormous success, his failure to mobilize significant portions of the working class around a working class politics. And the most signal, failure there, it has to do with Black voters. And first of all, I guess I just want to be clear. I'm firmly in the camp of Adolph Reed and Willie Leggett, who say, and this cannot be said too often, there is no Black vote. And the way that mainstream media repeatedly uses that phrase, it's just one of these kind of mind-bogglingly, casual racisms in my mind that just like show up in our discourse all the time without thinking. Like there is this blob vote. Yes, I know linked fate, if you want to get academic about it, and Black voter solidarity is a thing historically, but there is no, and there has never been a Black vote. But what Sanders failed to do was win enough Black votes. He failed to, if you will, split a larger portion of Black voters to break in his direction. And I think after two campaigns and after the failure of a progressive, even the Sanders style left in a number of other local and state race contexts to do that, we have to reflect on this as a major challenge for the left going forward in a way that I don't think I've really seen a lot of wrestling with this, a lot of hard wrestling with it. Part of it is that within the Sanders world, that the attack has been so often so dishonest from neoliberal types who just want to say, well, ending racism, breaking up the banks won't end racism, blah 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 blah, and we're so used to rebutting this like very cynical kind of neoliberal identity politics that and we're so or trumpeting the way in which, well, Bernie did, he won Latino voters, and there were some polls before this election that had him ahead with Black voters in some states, and running even almost with Biden before South Carolina with Black voters. But the truth is, it didn't happen, and we need to reckon with why it didn't happen here, why it didn't happen in all sorts of other state races, from AOC's congressional race, where Black voters voted for Crowley, to even the more recent and more inspiring wins by someone like Cori Bush. If you look at the district map in St. Louis, this happened after my article, working class and lower class North St. Louis, over 90% Black, those precincts went heavily for the incumbent opponent, and she won enough of those votes to get into office. And so I do think we can learn something from Cori Bush, but her constituency was still was the kind of white progressives in the southern part of the city. And this issue, this failure to break into Black working class enclaves in neighborhoods, it's really eloquent in the Sanders campaign and all sorts of other municipal struggles, from Atlanta to Chicago. And I mean, for me, it's a complex issue, and I think one that deserves several articles on its own. And Adolph and Willie and Cedric Johnson, other people have written at length about this too. But I think for me, my angle on this, my one little contribution, I think that I would emphasize is Obama. I don't think we can underrate the importance of Obama in transforming the Democratic Party in his own image and making not just Black politicians like the Jim Clyburns or the Hakeem Jefferieses of the world central to the party, not the way that they operated in Bill Clinton's Democratic Party, which was kind of brought in very cynically when needed for votes, but then reproved at every turn and told to pull up their pants and lectured at Stone Mountain and all sorts of horrible shit. when the party of Obama has made Black voters the kind of spiritual center of the party. And of course, it hasn't helped the overwhelming majority of African Americans. Black wealth was destroyed under Obama, et cetera. We know the material story. But I think the symbolic story is important, both that he was the first Black president and also the way in which he represented a kind of symbolic changing of the guard within the party and the way the party presents itself. And I think in the absence of a kind of real material politics that has already made a difference in people's lives, which hasn't happened yet, I think it's reasonable on a lot of levels for people to stick with that kind of affective and symbolic bond with Obama, especially if all the institutional politics around you who have delivered what small benefits what small pork barrel benefits you have gotten in, say, South Carolina, for a Clyburn constituent. That combination of institutional and kind of symbolic politics is potent. And I don't think we can just expect that we're going to turn it on its head by saying Medicare for all 10,000 times. And we've learned that. So what I would say, the only faint, this is a long answer, I'm sorry, but the faint glimmer of hope is, now we do have there is a Cori Bush, there is a Jamal Bowman, who, won another important victory recently. And I think having visible African-American, we had Ilhan Omar, but African-American politicians, African descendants of slaves, if you will, who have prominent national positions, who do not owe their election to the institutional party, who are, I hope, remain tightly connected to kind of a Sanders vision for the party, that might be able to sort of slowly be a little wedge here. But I don't think we should expect that this is going to change overnight with the next, if AOC ran for president in 2024, do I think she would win working class Black voters in the South against even against a Joe Biden? No, I don't. And I don't think we should fool ourselves that is in the cards right away. There's a lot more, of course, work institutionally, work in the labor movement, that we can do on this front. But I think the first step is recognizing that this is not just around the corner. This is a phenomenon. This is bigger than Bernie, but Bernie was the most eloquent example of it, and it's a real challenge for leftists, and one we're not going to succeed in winning any kind of national power without a large portion of the Black working class behind this project.
And yeah, on the flip side of that, there was the story of Bernie and Latino voters, which you touched on briefly, and to my mind, that's one of the more undercovered phenomenon of the 2020 race, just because the stunning reversal from 2016 is just really shocking. So, can you go into that? What happened there? What did the data say?
Yeah, that's the flip side, and that's for me one reason why some of the more pessimistic or inhospitable, ungenerous takes on Bernie and Black voters missed the boat. Where it's like, well, Bernie doesn't actually connect with people of color, or even leaving aside the really dishonest DNC kind of propaganda explanations, the ones that were at least well intended. But we're emphasizing Bernie's failure to connect with working class voters of color for whatever reason, whether it was rhetoric, whether it was his positionality, whether it was et cetera, et cetera. The success with Latino voters completely overwhelms that. And to me, the big difference between Black voters and Latino voters, at least one really important difference, is there's no Latino Obama. The Latino political class, for what it's worth, if you look at congressional districts in Southern California, for instance, this was the most eloquent example. Overwhelmingly endorsed Biden. I think one Southern California Latino congressman endorsed Amy Klobuchar. Bernie won virtually all of those districts. He won all of the Latino majority districts in Southern California, I'm pretty sure. And he won those heavily Latino, like 60-70% Latino districts in Southern California, often with majority, against a divided field, he won over 50%. So, this is something that the institutional ties and that whatever Latino politicians have in the community did not overwhelm. Bernie was able to go above and beyond them, or under them, or through them in some way, and win a lot of voters who had voted Hillary Clinton in 2016. Because if you look at the turnout, and this is the kind of silver, this is the touch of gray, if I can go Jerry Garcia here for a minute on the silver lining, because Latino turnout did not, in most of these places in South Texas, in LA, it did not go through the roof. It wasn't like Bernie brought in, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of like new working class Latino voters who'd never voted before. And we're suddenly like, Bernie Sanders, he's the man. I'm a socialist. Give me that Medicare for all. I'm not going to try to do it in Spanish. But because the numbers were like the same, they were flat.
Dame ese Medicare, ya, ahora mismo, dámelo ahora mismo, gratis, totalmente gratis. No quiero pagar $1.
I mean, he did do that. He definitely did do that, and I'm a big believer that it is the bread and butter shit that got people out. And he must have gotten lots of new voters. But so I think we need a lot more work on this too, more focused work on this, and data driven work too. I guess Chuck Rocha, who was like the mastermind of all this, has a new book out, so maybe he'll have some insight there. I'm sure they mobilized a ton of new voters, so I'm not saying that. But if you look at the overall turnout, it was relatively flat. So maybe a lot of other voters dropped out of the picture. And I think even maybe more powerfully, they convinced voters. They turned kind of some middle-aged, especially I'm thinking, middle-aged or even older Latino voters who were Clinton types into saying, no, I'm with Tio Bernie now. And or I'm with, whatever, I'm with my cousin Bernie. It's not just like he has to be so much older. What is cousin Bernie, Nando?
Primo Bernie.
Primo Bernie. Yeah, there were some primo Bernie voters out there. I think we should think about when we're thinking about that. And for me, the Southwestern story is front and center on where do we go from here. I don't know why Lucille Roybal Allard should not have a primary challenger from the left in literally the next election. Bernie won 57% of that district. She was an early Biden endorser. She's deep DNC. She was on all these DNC committees. She's a complete party acolyte. And she should, at minimum, have a left challenger of some note in California. And if LA DSA and whoever else is out there is not working on that, that's a crime, because that's an obvious first step for building more social democratic power in Congress. So there are a lot of, and same thing goes in South Texas. I mean, I know the Justice Dems tried and almost won that victory. I think there are a lot of other congressional seats, Denver, especially cities in the West, heavily Latino cities, where there's a path forward. And I think that's a kind of a short-term thing that we can do tomorrow. And in some ways, it doesn't require as much reflection and debate as what to do about Black working class voters, because I think Bernie showed that that through good organizing and through bread and butter messaging, Latino voters are ready to join this. Working class Latino voters are ready to join this coalition right now.
Yeah, I want to circle back to kind of the achievements of the campaign, because I think that people felt pretty demoralized, and they're kind of figuring out where to go from here. And you seem to make the argument in the article that it's like the cohesion of the DNC that stands between translating support for universal programs into national electoral victories, which rings true to me. But I wonder what, you say to those people who I think are generally well-meaning and who take from that lesson that they should move towards a third party, or like the Greens, or, a Democratic Socialist Party that kind of stands on its own.
Yeah, first of all, just to clarify and to throw and to one of the main arguments of the piece is, yes, just to sort of restate what you said. Maybe not so much the DNC specifically, but the sort of consolidation of the Democratic Party after South Carolina around Bernie was historically unprecedented. I don't care how many times John Chait has to call me like a cuckoo conspiracist. It's just a fact of history that a winner of Iowa and a winner, so-called, but a claimed winner of Iowa and a second place finisher in New Hampshire does not jump out before Super Tuesday. This has never happened before. It's only explicable given the kind of ideological and, in their mind, electoral stakes here. They thought Bernie would, everybody from Pelosi on down, Obama, Pelosi on down, thought that Bernie would be an electoral disaster. They needed to consolidate against him. That's just clear as day. But the other part is, well, why did they win all those voters? Why did Biden then instantly command all of those voters? That wasn't immediately clear, and we can talk about that. But in terms of like the struggle within against these institutional leaders who have shown, I agree with the critics to themselves to be implacably hostile to this Bernie style of politics. And I think anyone who's thinking that a Biden administration is going to do a new deal, just look at the coalition that elected him and think again. It's not happening. I have very limited hopes for what Biden will be able to do in office. But at the same time, I think, what are the terms of the struggle that we want to be in? Bernie has shown by contesting this stuff within the Democratic Party, at least within the ballot line, and it has brought these ideas into a left-wing relevance that no Ralph Nader campaign ever came close to doing and ever will come close to doing. I mean, the third party stuff, Seth Ackerman, ethered that argument, years ago, in his investigation of how the American ballot line politics works. But, any observer of history of the last, 50 years also could tell you that third party stuff is just an exercise in futility. Even in New York City, where we tried to get, I was out on the streets, knocking on doors for Jabari Brisport, socialist Green Party candidate for New York City Council. He won 25% of the vote. He ran in the Democratic Party primary. 3 years later, he wins. He's a state senator. I mean, it's just silly to think that this third partyism. I mean, I understand the impulse, but I think if you look at the results, if you're results oriented in any way, and I think we have to be, we're relevant now. We have to get to power. We have to be results oriented. We have to think, what is actually gonna claw back some power from these people? What do they fear? Do you think Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama fear a left-wing third party congregating around the DSA? No, they would love that. There would be nothing better than for the DSA to break off, maybe even with AOC, and take 4% of the party or something, or whatever it is, and kind of be this left-wing whipping boy for them to dominate like a behemoth the center of American politics. That not only does that not scare them, they would love that. We want to fight them where they fear us, which is on the national stage. And yes, that does mean within the Democratic Party. And I think it's actually, like, as a critic of identitarianism, I think people who have almost an identitarian grievance with fighting things within the Democratic Party need to think about that, because this isn't about your personal essence when you get into that, when you're having an argument about Medicare for all. It's about what is the context of struggle in which that can be achieved, and if you're in which the headway can be made. And if you're hung up on, but this means that you're a Democrat, and this means that you're with the bad guys, you're thinking like an essentialist, and I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, and you touched on this idea that the Biden coalition that is shaping up is going to be completely an anathema to any sort of New Deal, to put it, and that was, to me, the most terrifying part of your article, but also the most kind of enlightening part of your article, because I haven't seen anyone else touch on this kind of data. But we love to make fun of the Never Trump Republicans, and like the Lincoln Project and all that stuff. But in your piece, you coined the phrase Halliburton Democrats, and I want to read a paragraph. In retrospect, neither Jacobin nor Vox anticipated the real story of the 2020 primary, which did not involve Warren-style liberals, but a much more conservative tribe of wealthy suburbanites, disaffected Republicans who since the 2016 election have thrown themselves whole into Democratic Party politics all across the Sun Belt, from the defense contractors of Northern Virginia to the energy corporations of Texas and California. Joe Biden was boosted not just by Patagonia Democrats, but by newfound Chevron, Raytheon, and Halliburton Democrats. And like some of the data you'd point to, like just 100% increases in turnout for Democratic primary in some of these ultra wealthy districts is just, that seems to me like the most very understudied thing, but also a very terrifying thing.
Yeah, the mainstream media was very keen to pin Bernie's defeats on a withdrawal of particularly white working class support, in Michigan and elsewhere. And we can talk about that because there are cross-class, cross-race issues with Bernie's working class support and just the level of working class participation in politics more generally over the last several decades. That's something that we shouldn't wish away. But if you actually look at the numbers, the overwhelming difference between 16 and 20 for Bernie in Michigan and everywhere else was not with working class voters or in working class precincts. The new voters who came out and hammered him were voters making over $100,000 a year. You can see that in the Michigan exits very clearly. But even beyond Michigan, if you look at the precincts, counties are one thing, but I do think it's really useful to look at these turnout differences in precincts at the neighborhood level, because counties, even a rich county like Montgomery County, Maryland, or Westchester County, New York, or whatever, has incredible diversity racially, but economically inside it. And this is America. You have people sleeping on the streets next to next to giant mansions, and so you need to find those enclaves of geographically, almost, because they do exist, those gated communities in the energy corridor of Houston, where you can really sense, okay, well, what's happening here at this level. And the turnout, it just actually staggered me, not just from, I mean, we talked to the Patagonia Democrats. They were the kind of, immigrants are welcome here, except probably not in my, $1.7 million home in Cambridge, or something. They're welcome here to cut my grass or something. I mean, that's the kind of Warren Democrats that we would be dunking on, we were fighting with during the primary as Bernie people. And, I probably, in some ways, I think I missed the boat by dunking on them, because the truth is, a lot of those folks, if Bernie had been the nominee, they would have been our allies. They would have come through in a Bernie versus Trump contest, no question. And I think ultimately we do need some upper middle class support for this project. So if anything, I probably regret a little bit of the stinginess of some of those dunk attempts on the Patagonia Democrats, because the other group that came in, are basically Enron executives, in Houston, and Raytheon employees in Northern Virginia. And I actually got an email from a guy who's like, "I'm one of your Halliburton Democrats in Northern Virginia. My first choice was Buttigieg." Anyway, great article, good data. I was like, okay, great. I was like, I'm glad that Jacobin is reaching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have Halliburton socialists soon.
Yeah, Halliburton socialists. That's what we need. These places were, this is like literally where George Bush, was raised. George and Jeb Bush grew up in Tanglewood, Houston. These are, where Joel Osteen lives. I mean, these are really rich. I mean, that's just the tip of the spear. But if you look at a lot of these districts in, say, Charlotte or Raleigh, North Carolina, if you look at these places that were heavily Republican and much more Republican primary turnout several years ago, 4 years ago, or certainly before that, they've now become active Democrats because of this never Trumpism thing. And we thought it was a media phenomenon. We joked about it. But it turns out there are a lot of, we thought they were like Jennifer Rubin was speaking to a room full of no one, but it turned out she was speaking to a room full of, future Democratic primary voters. And she was making a lot of sense to them when she said that, President Trump was a Putin-loving, populist, and needed to be restrained because he might do Medicare for all, or whatever she says, and this is a new block that we have to reckon with in the short term. Certainly, I think they're going to make their voices heard in the Biden administration. They're going to be on the bleeding edge of austerity, I imagine. And if Biden wins, if Biden loses, they're going to probably gain even more power within the party, because they're going to be they've already been promoted to front and center of the resistance, and that resistance will become even more urgent in a Trump second term. So either way, we're going to have to deal with them. I don't think they're just going to slink back to the Republican Party after Trump. I think they see the Democrats as the party of kind of a sort of technocracy, and they want to be the right wing of that party. I don't know what else there is to be said, but I guess this goes to another part of the article is, I don't think we can beat them by convincing them of anything. We need to outnumber them. We need to swamp them at the polls with people who didn't vote in this year's election.
Yeah, I think that is a really crucial point and absolutely underinvestigated. And I also think you're seeing people in the Republican Party look at that constituency and imagine it as like a glistening ham. You know, Michigan's governor just endorsed Biden. I listened to an interview with him, and I just found a quote that he said. He called Trump a bully and said, being strong is standing up for your convictions. Being a bully is trying to intimidate those who are perceived to be weaker or a threat. This is what Snyder said. And then he said, as a proud nerd, I have had to deal with bullies over many years. It is a tragedy watching our world suffer from one. But I do think his
Nerds against clean drinking water in Flint, Michigan.
exactly. I think this kind of pushing to be the right wing of the technocracy is absolutely right. I think that's kind of what he's getting at with the nerd thing. And I think that other Republicans who have switched over and are saying, the most important thing is Biden can work across the aisle and Trump can't. They're trying to pull people in with them. They're trying to court Halliburton Democrats, but they're also making a case before it happens that, Biden's concessions to them have to be viewed as progressive because this stalemate in US government was the worst thing that happened. The degradation of rhetoric and the bullying was the worst thing that happened. So if you say like compromise and, like only kick off half of the people off of food stamps, then you're working across the aisle and you're good. I think they're kind of gearing up with that narrative.
If you poison children but don't also like make fun of them in your stump speeches, then that's a massive advantage. Yeah, no, it's that gap between the symbolic and the material. We talked about it with the black voter situation, but I think it's just as staggering on this front. And I think you're right. We either win or whatever happens in this election, that is going to be the ongoing argument and claim to relevance of the Rick Snyder wing of the Democratic Party. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying that. That actually stunned me when he said that. I mean, I thought,
Yeah.
he was not a moderate. He was not a Mitt Romney even, right? He was like a conservative. Anyway, he is a conservative. Yeah.
He hasn't walked back from that. What his take on it is, he's like, I don't like bullies. I listened to an interview where they were like, so now that you're endorsing Biden, do you support Democratic policies? And he's like, I don't think we have to go as far as that.
Yeah. He's going to endorse a ban on wedgies and swirling national ban on
I don't know why he doesn't like Melania's Be Best thing. Isn't that anti-bullying? But just didn't work.
I mean, the Democrats love this shit so much, right? The nerd stuff and the we're the party of being best in school and we're the party of doing our homework. And I mean, it is troubling to think about that is one of the many dark futures is the kind of where the Democrats not just they're leaning and lurching maybe in that direction already. But if they wholeheartedly become the coalition that runs the gamut, as Dorothy Parker said, from Snyder to Buttigieg, and that's the Democratic Party, and the Republicans become the party of this of the white working class people entirely, and they become populist xenophobes. That's the entirety of the party. I mean, a lot of people say we're here already. But I think it actually can be a lot more. The policies haven't actually moved so far with the rhetoric, and if they do, that would be devastating. So I think I mean, whatever. I guess I'm already, I've already, jumped the shark and become a sheepdog on this stuff. But I do think that kind of situation where you would have, would make class politics, which is what we're trying to do here. If Jacobin stands for one thing, it stands for that, I think. And how do you do class politics in that kind of environment? With the Sanders movement, we had not just a viable class politics, but a class politics that moved and changed national politics. And to surrender that, to just throw your hands up and say, and retreat to to kind of a sort of, studied, affected indifference to all this stuff that happens, to give up on that kind of class struggle as these parties continue their realignment. I think it's a devastating error, and maybe worse than that.